architecture for high-performance apps, Wipro Technologies. This comes. Today he's going to talk on the patterns for building high-performance applications in cloud. Please attend this session to learn the various application patterns that should be used to build high-performance applications for the cloud. The session will explore the various application architecture patterns that need to be kept in mind when developing applications for the cloud. Please come in, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So, welcome to the session. Just a brief background about myself. Currently, I'm actually playing my practice lead for architecture and a high-performance application within Wipro Technologies. Before that, I worked in multiple companies. Two important things, maybe my blogs, the techspot.com, where I do a lot of blogging specifically around performance engineering and cloud computing. So that you might find some of those articles useful. Expectations. So how many of you are actually having application already running in cloud? Some people. How many are actually facing performance issues with those applications in cloud? Couple of people, okay. So the idea about this the talk, it is not going to solve your problem. So don't expect that when you walk out, all your application performance issues are actually getting solved. But what we are going to talk about is, we'll see what are the different problems, how can we actually understand those problems better, and then what are the possible solutions which can we think of. So my idea is to show you the door, not make you walk through that. Okay. So agenda is basically we'll cover the patterns for some of the high performance applications. Eventually I hope I have lowered down the expectations, so I will be able to meet them. So today, right, if we are building any application, three key requirements are actually required from a user's perspective, right? They're actually asking that, can you reduce my latency? It should be as fast as possible, right? Scalable. Can I meet all my demands? So when you are specifically in the consumer application business, you don't know the demand upfront. So ideas, are you ready to actually take into account when the spikes come in, right? Are you ready from an application point of view to handle that increasing load, right? And the other one is high availability. So what happens? The load comes in, but your application goes down, right? So if it's not available, it is as good as dead, right? So if it's a business critical application, you're actually down, you're losing money at that point of time, right? So from a business point of view, these non-functional requirements, what we call, right, reduced latency, scalability, and availability have become the three key drivers from a non-functional requirements today. We go to scalability, we'll discuss the first one. How many of you recognize this picture? If you've been in Bangalore, I would say everybody would have visited one or the other Darshini, right? Or Sukhsagars, or right? So what is your experience out here, right? If you look at from, so you walk in, there's a cash counter. So you see a lot of people are crowded around that. Each of them waving their 100 rupee or 500 rupee note, trying to get his attention to say, okay, you take my order and then you give me the slip, right? So somewhere he will actually try to take your order, take, okay, 3 dosas, 4 idlis and 1 vada sambar and all. He'll give you a slip, right? Suddenly you move from one counter to the other counter. In the internet parlance called request redirection actually. So you go to the next counter. Again, there's a set of people who are actually now going to serve you, right? So there are 3 to 4 people, and there are again a bunch of crowd of people are standing there. So you hand your slip, right? So, but for that also you have to wait. So the person behind that has to be available to be able to service you. So once he takes that request, he actually then looks at it, okay. Then he starts basically ordering one by one. So if you have 4 idlis, he'll go and pack the 4 idlis. So you have 2 vadas, he'll go and pack 2 vadas. He'll have dosa, then you'll actually ask the dosa guy to prepare that dosa. Till everything comes together, he will basically wait. And then he comes and collects it all together and hands over to the parcel. So what has happened in this scenario? Like, what have we seen? So let's say in case of the first scenario, right, the cash counter, if the guy goes out for even a 2-minute bio break, a lot of people will start getting crowded, right? So there is no concept of a load balancing here. The moment the guy is there, people just start queuing up, right? So the same person, when the request gets redirected back, right, what is happening now? All the requests are getting actually processed synchronously, right? So I'm actually holding only one slip and trying to process that. And what that slip is basically a state for me now. If you look at from a systems perspective, it is nothing but a state that this is my order and this is the data I need to provide, right? I'm holding on to that state and then I'm basically synchronously trying to get all this data and process it for you, right? So what happens is inhibits my ability to service large number of customers at the same time. So I can only service customers synchronously, but the way the Indians are, we are happy standing in a line because that is what it is all our experience all about, right? So same experience, let's go to a fast food restaurant, let's say McDonald's, right? So what do you see? You walk in, there are 3 counters where basically take the orders, right? 3 or 4 at least, right? So what happens is, suddenly you see the request coming in automatically getting load balanced in what you call, right? Right? So you walk in, you give your order, the person takes an order, what he does is basically hands over that slip to the next person. So basically your order, internally if you look at, you will see a machine there which will flash your order, and suddenly that order gets divided into multiple pieces. So what is happening is the burger guy will start preparing the burgers, the French fries guys will start collecting the fries. There's a guy who will actually fill in soda, he'll go and fill in the soda. And there's a third person, a fourth person who will actually stand there, collect all that, and basically kind of an aggregation, and that basically serve that. And it comes back to the counter again, where he basically puts in your napkins and the straws, right? And then the order is served to you, right? So what has happened in this case is, first of all, when I came in as a request, I got load balanced. Then when I moved to the next level, this request was asynchronously breaked, right? So my order was synced up, basically split up between multiple peoples. Now everybody is working, and they in the background doesn't know which order it is. So somebody else aggregates that order for me and then provides it to me, right? And what is happening in the same? The state, instead of being maintained by the person on the counter or somebody else, is maintained centrally, right? So basically the state is now actually not carried out by one person, it's actually maintained centrally, which can be accessed by everyone, right? So what has happened is, now they're able to guarantee that we'll be able to deliver a burger meal in less than 1 minute. And why are they able to do that? Because they have done their studies, right? If you go back, if you're from an engineering background, right? What has happened is, in the typical shop floor, you would have done your time and motion studies. You would understand basically how the items move. You would understand where are the bottlenecks are and try to resolve that. Same way, McDonald's over the years, as a fast food, they have actually looked at that model and basically looked at each and every piece of what needs to be optimized, where are my bottlenecks, and how can I optimize that, right? If you look at from that model perspective, they're able to guarantee a burger meal within 1 minute, whereas our guys will not be able to guarantee anything less than 2 to 3 minutes, or maybe you will have to spend 1 minute at the counter itself just to get the slip itself. Right? So same way, if you look at from my application perspective, right? Same way we are doing. Traditionally, we are building applications like this. We are not bothered about the user because they will, as long as I have a shop, they will come. That was my philosophy, right? Here, what the idea is, it's a volume game. I'm not trying to play a value game, but I'm trying to play a volume game now. Because I have to serve, if I can serve large number of customers in the same amount of time, I can actually make much more money, right? So think it from your application perspective, right? No load balancing versus load balanced. You have a stateful versus stateless, so where people are carrying state in case of McDonald's, and synchronous versus asynchronous. And in the cloud model, they become all the more important, right? So when suddenly your spikes come, you can actually add more servers. So suddenly your load balancing capacity is unlimited. It's only limited by the amount of servers available in the cloud, right? Stateful versus stateless. Since you are not carrying the state, you have already delegated to somebody else, it allows you to scale up your applications. Your servers are nothing but dumb, right? They are not carrying any state. So I can put any number of servers and they can still serve my users. Synchronous versus asynchronous. When I go in a synchronous way, what is happens? I go in a serial order. So it takes certain time. Whereas when I break it into multiple requests or go a synchronous way, what is happening is, I'm actually breaking that initial request into multiple sub requests, letting all the people be underneath it basically serve me. So what that means is, I suddenly now, within the same 5 seconds, I can actually have 5 different systems respond back to me, right? And instead of doing a serial, I'm doing a parallel, or what do you call, parallelization of tasks, right? So the moment I do asynchronous, suddenly my ability to serve more customers and to serve them faster automatically increases. So that is where I do look at, from a scalability patterns perspective, these 3 patterns are very crucial when you are actually building your applications. Make sense? So we'll move to the next one, latency. So if you look at any basic premise on application is, there's a user and there's a data. The whole idea is to bring the data close to the user, right? that is the whole premise. If you look at if from a blocks perspective, there's a data which we have stored somewhere, and there's a user who is accessing that data from a device. But that data can be anything, right? And our whole idea is to basically go fetch that data and give it to the user. Or think it in terms of that if I have to go from point A to point B, right? I'm trying to run a Formula 1, right? How fast I can go is depends on the ability of my car as well as what is the road I have, right? But in terms of servers, what we do is just to serve that data, we dump in large number of servers in between. So these are like roadblocks we are put in terms of our getting that access to the data. So if I want to run a Formula 1 and if I have road which is like Bangalore roads, can I run actually at 200 kilometers an hour? Right? I cannot do that. Right? So what is happening is somewhere I am adding more roadblocks in between the user and the data. And on top of that, I'll dump a huge bunch of frameworks. So I'll use a lot of frameworks. I'll use Spring, I'll use Struts. So whatever is there, I'll try everything and dump on top of it. And on top of that, I'll host it in a cloud, which is maybe again far away from the users. So if my users are in India, I may be hosting it out in the US, right? So what is happening is all the requests first go to the US and then come back to me. So what is happening is actually I'm adding to the latency. So the users who actually should be accessing the data as fast as possible are actually getting bogged down by what I'm doing here. Right? So how can I reduce latency? Simplify. Right? Reduce the number of moving parts. The simpler your application is, the faster it is actually to serve the user. It's like if you have to go from point A to point B, right? If you have less number of roadblocks, you'll be able to go faster. If you have a speed breaker every 2 kilometers, you will not be able to attain that speed. Same way, if you have an application which has less number of servers or less number of frameworks to be used, I can actually serve that data faster to the user. Other is, can I bring the data closer to the user? So instead of the user sitting out there, can I bring it closer to the user? Right? Today, if you look at, there are a lot of caching techniques that are available. I can cache at the browser level. So that means when the user is accessing the data from my browser, can I access and cache some of the data at browser itself? So I don't even know to the server. Right? Then next you can do caching at your edge networks, your CDN network, so Akamai. Right? So your servers, your client need not even hit your server or data centers. Right? Once they hit your data center, can you cache data at your web server level? Can you cache data at your app server level? Can you even cache data at your database level? So I don't need to do disk IOs. Right? So there are multiple techniques available based on the usage which allow you to cache this data and allow you to bring it as much closer to the possible, the user. Because as long as the data is closer to the user, you'll be able to serve that faster to the end user. And third one is, very important is, from a cloud perspective, host closer to your customer. So if your customer base is in India, right, no point in going and hosting out in US or UK or whatever. There are a lot of good options from a cloud computing perspective which are available in India today. As of, I believe, last month, BSNL has also launched their own cloud. And they have data centers in cities like Jaipur, Jalandhar and Ahmedabad, right, which are like tier 2 cities. So if your customer base is basically around that, it makes sense to actually host closer to the end user, right? And if most of the users are also using, let's say, the BSNL broadband, the access and the connectivity will be much faster, right? Similarly, BSNL in India also has something called InstaCompute, where they give you cloud computing or virtualization as a platform, IaaS as a platform. So that's another option if you are actually trying to serve users within India, right? And their rates are comparable to Amazon. I'm not saying they may be slightly costly, but that 10% increase might be offset by the amount of the latency improvement you will get from a user's perspective. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. If you're speaking about this, if you're speaking about like a kind of a cloud which is private to a company which has to be accessed through the company, in that case, the point
in that case, yes, because you're already hosting it closer to your customer.
Correct.
Because you already have a private cloud which you're hosting within your data center, and that data center is basically have a direct connectivity to your offices. So
Correct.
which your offices are connected to WAN.
Yeah.
So in that case, yes. But in terms of public cloud, it's very important you host closer to your users.
Correct, because because this, like if you're speaking like about your customers will be accessing this like the pages straight off the cloud
Yes.
machines.
So even in enterprise, what happens is now if you might actually host your, let's say, application within, let's say, Bombay, but your users may, or your offices may be spread all over India. So somebody trying to access it, let's say from Assam or somebody from Bengal, he might see still a lag, right? So question is, in that case, you cannot now suddenly change your hosting provider, but you can use some of these caching technique to see whether you can bring that data closer to the user, right? How can I actually have a caching server maybe which is hosted somewhere in your in the northeast area, which can actually host some of this content already, right? So based on your data providers as well as your data center operators, you can actually look at a combination which works you best. Because a lot of times it is not just the application is bad, it's the internal infrastructure also has to support that kind of latency. So if you are actually, the tendency is always to blame the application is not performing well. But at times the problem may be the underlying infrastructure may be configured in such a way that it's actually adding to the latency. So for every request I have to go back, and let's say you have built application using AJAX calls and all. The browser is making 100 requests to the center, right? And what is happening is each of them request is going separately, and now if the connectivity between this data and this is high, then automatically everything will actually start slowing down. So we need to look at all these parameters in terms of when we're designing application, what all it takes to reduce latency.
More number of frameworks you use, there is a lot of latency, right?
Right.
So, but there is a need where we need to use these frameworks, right?
I'm not saying that. So don't overuse them. So a lot of time for the same kind of functionality, right? We'll use multiple frameworks. So multiple applications or multiple, let's say my web application built in some other framework, the integration tier is using some other framework, my backend tier is some other framework, and then to aggregate all that I'm using another framework, right? So reduce the number of frameworks, make it more simpler.
But why we use this is because like we want to reduce the dependency between the
Yes.
layers, right? So that makes sense to use different frameworks at different levels. But
Right. So question is, what is when you say dependency between layers, right? There is a dependency. Question is, do I need to reduce dependency between a web server layer and my app server layer? In the end, I still host them on the same box.
So
Right.
are you suggesting that so when you go to cloud, then use less number of frameworks at less levels? I mean, like that's what
So
you're
I'm not
suggesting.
saying from a cloud perspective, this can be even valid within an enterprise applications. But the idea is to reduce the number of frameworks. If let's say you are hosting only dependencies, right? We say that Struts is something as a web application framework, then Spring is more of an application framework. End of the day, you still host them on the same box, right? Why do you need to actually create so many layers? Right? Why do we create those layers? Because in the end, have you seen an application which you actually have put in two separate boxes, right? But there is a tendency that we want to basically add more and more layers on top of it because we think we want to delineate that, right? Similarly, in the database also, right? We always think JDBC provides me the best because tomorrow if I move from Oracle to DB2, what happens? But how many applications actually move from DB2 to Oracle? Right? In the end, we end up rewriting only if there is a need to move that, right? We're rewriting the whole application. It's very difficult to actually move from one product to another product so easily. Because even though we write all these interfaces, we write adapters, moving from one environment or even changing a baseline, if I want to move from JBoss to WebSphere or WebSphere to WebLogic, my code I still need to go back and relook at my code. Right? There's no direct way I take all my deployables and directly dump onto another machine that still works. That never happens, right? Because every product is trying to compete on certain ways, right? What happens is to compete that, if I have everybody competing on the same J2E specs, then there is nothing to compete. How do I show that I'm better than you, right? So I have to give you some proprietary extensions. The moment you buy into that proprietary extension, you are already tied to that product, right? But if you look at only the baseline, then you don't need all these costly products, right? Same way when you go to the cloud also, the premise they're selling is, I'm already providing the underlying infrastructure. Right? The way I can hook you is when by buying your additional extensions. So when you take an RDS from, let's say Amazon sells RDS, right? I'll take an RDS from you. I take a messaging queue from you, right? I'm actually getting hooked into you now. There's no way I can migrate my application directly from Amazon to Azure. The service providers may say that there's a way to provide that, but in the end, there's no direct way to do that. In the end, when you looked at that, you configured it, you coded it against certain specifications, and to make that best use of that. That only works if you actually have used their specifications to get the optimum juice out of that. Third pattern is in terms of high availability, right? So traditionally we have this kind of architecture where we have web servers, we have two app servers talking to a database, right? So in terms of availability, it is very important that whenever a failure happens, right, how fast you can recognize that failure. Because if I can't recognize that, what happens is my load balancer will still giving the request by to a server which is already down. If I can't, that means that from the end user perspective, I'm actually getting routed to a server which is not even serving or responding back, right? So it's very important that when a server goes down, I'm able to actually identify that failover, right, as fast as possible. So my request should automatically get read out to the new server, and the new server should be able to recognize the database. So from a failover perspective, right, cloud provides unlimited opportunities. In a traditional environment, it is not possible to actually have so many machines available at times. But in the cloud, since most of the, let's say the cloud, one of the cloud attributes is to be able to access the cloud resources over HTTP, right? Most of them provide the service over HTTP. So you can actually programmatically even handle cloud the failovers. You can identify failovers programmatically. Now you don't have to depend on somebody in the IT systems to tell me that the server has gone down. In your application itself, you can write code which says, if I'm not responding back, can I spawn a new instance and start using it? Right? So that is where the power of the cloud comes in, specifically for failovers. So, and in case of database, there are multiple techniques which you use for availability. One is the standard one is the master-master. So where there are two databases that basically syncing up with each other, and both the app servers or the servers can talk to them. The other one is in terms of the master-slave, where you have one as server as a master, the other one is a slave. The slave basically reads off from the master, and then the servers, what they do is for write, they go to one server which is the master, and reads can be done off a slave server. Right? And as you scale up, what happens is you can actually keep on adding more slaves. Because if your data based on your traffic pattern, if you have more requests coming from a read, right, your actually load will be much more on the slaves. But again, there's a theoretical limit to that. So beyond a certain point, your master's ability to upgrade those slaves will also come down. So you can't theoretically keep on adding slaves, but yes, to a certain extent, you can keep on adding slaves. And beyond that point, you again have to relook at it from a new architecture perspective again. So from availability, let's say failovers and having redundancy, both at the server layer as well as the database layer is very important. Because if my data is not available, I will not be able to serve my users, right? So from a data perspective, two key patterns, master-master and master-slave, which we definitely can use. In terms of, if you are going from a cloud perspective, you can even use the cloud provided service. So Amazon has RDS where they provide MySQL server, and Oracle as a service, right? So if you buy into that, then they can do the failovers for you. So they will internally do the backups, failovers, and even multi-zone availability. So in that way, cloud provides much more availability options than a traditional enterprise IT could have provided you. And in terms of your web server, app server, you have an unlimited scalability to add more servers. So as long as your applications are built as stateless, what allows you is to your state is anyway stored somewhere else. Your dump servers can be added any number of times. So for those three patterns, we'll see what are the different impact factors. So if you look at, right, your solution architecture, your application architecture, your deployment architecture, everything actually impacts how your non-functional requirements are met, right? So your topology of the solution, your single point of failures, have you identified the right single point of failures, right? Your chosen product stack, your integration strategy, right? Your application design, your choice of frameworks. How much have you enforced your standards, build and release, right? Because when you're dealing with large cloud deployments, it's very important that a lot of these build and deployments are automated. You cannot actually hope to actually add a new server manually because it's very error prone, right? And then when the spikes come in, if you have to add servers on your own, then it becomes a problem because then it requires a manual intervention. So things has to be automated to be able to handle those spikes and loads coming in. And from a deployment perspective, the hardware choices, when you are actually putting even your server virtualization images, right? What kind of images are you taking it? That also depends upon in terms of how you meet your requirements. Your hosting environment, your application system monitoring, another important area. If you're not able to monitor your application, you will not be able to come whether it has failed, when it has failed. So from a failure perspective, to be able to recognize that failure, it's important to monitor that application. And again, capacity planning, right? So a lot of in the cloud applications, you don't know, when you start up, maybe you don't know the amount of traffic you're going to get. But as you keep on growing, you will actually find out that this is the amount of static users, amount of CAM. And during these peak times, I get this kind of spikes. So we basically use that data to do your capacity planning, right? So like in Zynga, what they say is, so when they launch a new game, they have no idea how much the game will be going to be popular. So the new game is always hosted in Amazon. But once they know that after 3 months that what is the kind of pattern, the numbers they're seeing, they bring that application into the private cloud. So what that means is when I don't know my demand, I host in public because I can have unlimited scalability facility. But once I have the demand known, then I can actually bring it back into my private cloud. So that allows me to actually have a scale defined where, because internally for my private cloud, I will still be limited by the amount of hardware I have put in. Unlike the Amazons, I'm not going to put in hardware every 1 month, right? So what happens is when you start upfront, you start with the cloud. But once your load patterns are identified, you can bring that application maybe back into your private cloud. So that allows you to basically make sure that you know the patterns. So from a summarization perspective, we saw from a 3 broad categories: scalability, latency, and high availability. We saw the patterns. And from a cloud perspective, we see why they make more sense is the scalability and elastic ability of the cloud, right? The metered usage. And since they use the internet technology like HTTP access, that allows me to actually access those resources directly into my application. I don't need to depend on the IT system now to spawn a new server, right? And again, they are service based. So everything is available as a separate service. So database is a separate service, machine is a separate service, right? If I want to use CDN network, it's a separate service. I want additional hardware, RAM, it's a separate service. So the infrastructure is also provided as a service. But in the end, we can read all the books, but unless we try it, we will not know. So it's easier said than done. So thank you very much. So I'm open to questions if you have. There's 1 minute, one question.
Hi. Actually, what I understand is, so if I have an application and I want to put it in cloud, so I need to change the application also?
Yes, if you want to take advantage of some of these cloud attributes, yes, you have to change them.
So if I have a standalone application and put it in cloud, so I'll
It
not
is no
get...
different. Basically, earlier it was running on a physical hardware, now it's running on a virtualized machine. So there's no different. If your usage pattern is same, then there's no difference.
Okay. So at the application level also I need to check the scalability.
Yes, because at the end, if you want to manage your user growth, right? So if that is not the goal, then there is no difference between putting on a physical hardware or on a virtualized machine.
Okay.
Even in your enterprise data centers, a lot of these applications are already running on VMs, right?
Yes.
So there's no difference between your VM and versus an Amazon VM.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
So if you don't want to actually, in terms of the scalability, availability requirements, then basically you can be as good in both the cases.
Okay. So normally, like people advertise that if you put your applications onto the cloud.
No, they're not going to help. And nowadays they're providing the basic infrastructure, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Either you change your application to start using some of their other services, right? So instead of using your own database, let's say you start using the Amazon provided database service, right?
Yeah.
So in that case, your database availability suddenly goes up.
Okay. Yes.
But then that still means that you need to change your applications for that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
There is one question.
How the performance of the applications on for high performance applications?
So what has happened is in the last 5-6 years now, the earlier the days were that for high performance computing you need very dedicated hardware and you actually have very high end computers. But what has happened is now today, if you want to run a very high performance load, you can actually spawn an instances on Amazon, but have large number of instances, right? So if you're building a supercomputer, right, you don't build one large monolithic. You actually take small CPUs, bundle it all together, and they do parallel processing for you. The same model today is applied in the Amazon also, where they actually even have a HPC module where you can actually tell them at how many nodes you want, and it will actually spawn it for you. So a lot of calculations which earlier companies were doing on their supercomputers, which would take them 2 weeks to 3 weeks, now they're actually doing it on Amazon, spawn that cloud, right, run it for maybe 2 days, do the calculations, and actually then just destroy the cloud, right? So what you are doing is you are saving an entire capex. So you load it whatever you want, you load your data, you load your processing modules, and you process, right? If your processing speed is slow, you add more instances of that. So in the last session we saw, right, big data, Hadoop, the map reduce problems. What they are doing is basically trying to break that down problem into smaller chunks. So every node in that entire space is actually doing some processing, little bit of processing, and somewhere you basically collect all that and then serve that user. So today Amazon is already having all that in terms of high performance computing clusters, so you can actually instantiate it.
When I run it on a virtualized clusters, the performance.
So if you are actually very running a very low latency application, which requires too much of I/O, then definitely virtualization may not be the best option.
No, it's not too much I/O. It's too compute intense.
It's computing, then it doesn't make too much of a sense, because then you can actually have, let's say, 8-core or a 12-core CPU machine realized, and as long as you can take advantage of those 12 cores, your application should work pretty fine. It's only when you have very low latency and high I/O requirements, because end of the day virtualization also adds the overhead, right? Because on the hardware your virtualization image sits, and then on top of that your application sits. So somewhere that also adds certain amount later. If you're looking at very low latency, then your VM needs to be taken out, right? Reduce the amount of components. But if that is not the case, then from just a CPU utilization perspective, you can actually use virtualization, not an issue. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello.
In like one of the like in so-called one of the examples which you're speaking about, about Zynga, like what you had said is that like they go about this first hosting like that particular game into Amazon, and then they this after the demand is known, it is moved from a public cloud into a private cloud.
Yes.
Like how straightforward is this move? Because I would think that this like when you go about hosting a game kind of an application on a public cloud, you using so-called Amazon Amazon components. In that case, it would
so they don't use a lot of Amazon.
You have to go about rebuilding it.
So what
to some extent.
they don't use actually a lot of Amazon components as such. Okay. What they use Amazon is primarily from a zone availability perspective.
Okay.
But in the end, they actually put on all their own components. So basically, the entire VM actually can be just ported from that public cloud to the private cloud. Nothing more than that.
Yeah, but if you if you
but they don't use the other service of the Amazon, which can bind you in. So they don't do the RDS and all that.
All those so-called Amazon specific components, like so-called Google Engine and stuff,
they will not use. They will only use from just an infrastructure perspective.
Okay.
Pure virtualization instances.
Just the base layer of the Amazon IaaS.
Yes.
Okay.
Because those are what they call the PaaS services, right? So at the end, if I'm giving you data as a service, that becomes more of a platform as a service model.
Okay.
Right? Not as an infrastructure as a service model. So most of these, what they do is they just only use infrastructure as a service model.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Dinesh from Affinity.
Hi.
I have a simple question regarding the I/O. We just talked about performance. Do cloud providers typically use commodity hardware for storage, or do they have specific high performance storage devices?
So most of them use commodity hardware, but these are actually custom built machines. They don't actually go for the branded machines.
Okay.
But what they do is some of them, I have started providing now even high-end machines on demand request. So if you can commit to a certain amount of period and certain amount of resource requirements, then they can even provide that.
Okay, so majority of the current providers, do they have commodity hardware? Or how do you put?
Yeah, most of them are commodity hardware.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question actually. I was in another session where they were talking about the economics of cloud, and one of the fear was loss of control, right? And that kind of plays into what you were saying about simplification. So when you talk about loss of control, the issue of vendor lock-in comes in, right? But with the standardization, that is, fear is getting reduced. But there's a trade-off, right? If you want to simplify and you still want to wring the performance, perhaps you will use some of the RDS or some of those features. So how do you trade off between these kind of challenges, where you don't want vendor lock-in on one hand, but on the other hand, you want simplification?
So idea is, to some extent, that vendor lock-in is more of a, what do you call, a dream. In the end, whenever you buy something, it's already logged into that vendor, right? Whether it's a hardware or the software, the moment I choose Windows or a Unix or a Linux, I've already logged into that vendor, right? So there, as long as my application is running on that, I'm already logged. Now it's a question of, do I want to log in onto my provider also, my data center provider also? Currently, that was something I owned. Now I'm saying is, I'm actually even hiring a data center provider from some outside, right? So now I want to have ability to even change my data center provider. So most of them, if you look at from IS perspective, they are not so easy. In the end, there will be some lock-in, and it is not possible that even when you look at, right, even the virtualized machine images, they will not be of the same capacity. So when you move from a 2-core CPU on Amazon and to a 2-core CPU on Azure, they will even have different configurations for that. So 2 cores, when they say 2 cores, it might look at 2 cores, but they might mean actually different things. Your application again need to be retested.
Okay.
So a lot of times there is no standardization in terms of even what they call as cores. Right? Today, the traditional Intel codeware, right, what we have in our desktops or laptops, we have a 2-core or a 4-core, right? We can't compare that with our cell phone 2 cores now, because that's a different chip, that's a different architecture, and that their core means different things, right? Even though we think it's a 2-core and my desktop or my laptop is also 2-core, but their processing capacities are altogether different, right? So the vendor lock-in will happen. There's no way you can escape that. It's a question is you have to embrace it and you know where the risks are.
Okay.
In the end, the amount of flexibility and the cost advantage you get, that negates all these things.
Okay, thank you.
In fact, talking about this locking, don't they have a common API? Do cloud providers have a common API to work with?
It's still a maturing field, right? So it will take some time to do that. And why do I want to build a common API? I want to lock in, right? It's my customer. Why do I want him to go away?
That's right. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to have
Right? It's like Apple saying that I want to give you an open API that anybody can take my, right? If you look at Android, they're doing it. So what has happened is there are so many versions of Android itself today. So question is, do I want to do that?
But typically right now we don't have many APIs common among the cloud providers. We don't. Okay.
They're trying. There are standard groups who are trying to do that, but they're again trying to do it from the other side, where they want to sell more commodity hardware, right? They want to basically say, okay, use my standard. Right, the VMware says, okay, use my standard. So because and the idea is to gain more market share, right? The more market share, the more dominant I have. Once I have, then I can decimate whatever I want.
Right.
Yes.
We are just seeing about the failover case for the app server, right? So do we need to build that the failover case, or how does it actually works in the cloud? So
redo in the sense, I think.
We have seen the architecture with the app servers and web server.
How do I test that?
No. Do we need to have a separate machine we need to order for in the cloud, or how does it actually work? The automatic failover.
So in the cloud, basically, most of these vendors provide an API. So one way is you can actually look at even the third-party software available, which can actually detect your failures and can automatically instantiate a new server. Right. So what happens is you instantiate a new server, it gets added into a load balancer, and the load balancer recognizes your server and starts serving the requests. Right. That is one way, because now, so there are companies like RightScale, which provide you tool capability where you can actually tell them that this is my environment, right? whenever the utilization of my servers goes beyond 50%, add a new box, right? Because I don't want to go beyond 50%. And as soon as you go below, if I go below 20% server utilization, take off one box. So what is happening is now I'm controlling how many servers are actually running at time, right? So if I as a business usually get my, let's say, maximum users between 9 to 5, right? Why do I want to run my 10 servers the entire 24/7? So what do is between 9 to 5 I spawn additional boxes. Other times basically I take them off, right? Only run the minimum number of required, right? So there are ways to do that. So you can do programmatically also. There are third-party monitoring tools which can do that for you also.
But how about the file systems and other stuff of when we do the failover?
Right. So what happens is you basically don't keep those ideas. That is better. You can't keep your state on the box. The state has to be somewhere else.
Okay.
So if the state is not there, then your box is just a dumb machine, right? So what I do is basically I instantiate a new option or a new virtual machine, install all the software required because there's a script I have put in, right? For whatever I required from an application deployment perspective, I actually even have a deployment module from where I can pick it up and deploy that. Okay. So it's basically all scripted down.
Okay, so we need to deploy that whenever it goes down.
Yes, yes. Or you can even have a pre-built image kept. So if you know your server doesn't change, you can even create an image of your server and keep it, right? So what happens when a server goes down, you basically load that image and just instantiate with that. So everything is preloaded in that.
But in that case, there would be downtime, right, for the application.
So that depends, right? When do you do? So if you have two servers and one of them goes down and the other one is not able to take a load, then there is a problem, right? So if you have three, right, then even one goes down, two can take a load, and by the time third comes up, they automatically gets redistributed.
The same is the case with the database when we have a master and slave.
Yes.
Do we need to do the same reimaging or building of those in the cloud?
Yes.
Okay.
So unless if you don't bring them down, how they'll sync up, because they will know where to sync up those.
Okay. So then business need to face the downtime in the cloud, right?
They will face if you are not built. Again, it depends upon what is the topology and how have you identified your single point of failures.
Okay.
Right? You need to identify your single point of failures and have to address those. If you think your database is single point of failures, maybe I relook at your maybe going with the Amazon RDS functionality, where they provide me the uptime.
Okay.
They will do the backup. They will do so even if they go down, what happens is they say we'll provide you another instance of the same thing in another zone, right? But your application should be still able to go and get now attached to that new instance. Okay. So if my whole server goes down, right, my application was pointing to this box, which is this IP address. Now they should be able to recognize that failure and point to a new IP address.
Okay. Thanks.
Now, on behalf of UBM, we'd like to present Mr. Gupta with a small token of appreciation.
Thank you.
Now we break away for a 5-minute tea break and we regroup, and we'll have a session from Somnath Madishetty, Senior Principal Consultant, Security, CA Technologies.